Hello and welcome to the latest in the Advanced ADF Insider Series. My name is Sean O'Brien and I'm a Principal Product Manager with the JDeveloper and ADF team. And today the topic we're going to be covering is service-oriented architecture integration with the Oracle ADF framework. First, we're going to have to cover where the ADF and SOA artifacts live within the Oracle Fusion architecture and how this integration is facilitated. Next, we're going to use a hypothetical situation to illustrate how this integration can take place by showing us integrating with a SOA team. And the way we're going to do this is by simulating exposing ADF business components as SDO web services, looking at customizing human task flow pages and activities, as well as consuming web service and composite components from this SOA team utilizing web service data control. So looking at the Oracle Fusion architecture, this should be fairly familiar. We've got the different layers of technology along the top, and then showing where the ADF framework and the SOA frameworks fit inside of that architecture. So we've got the user interface and business services at the ADF layer, and the way that we interact then with the composite layer is, for example, through the business logic, we can expose our business services as SDO services or utilize the eventing mechanisms. We can then, at the user interface layer, we can go ahead and interact with the human workflow service, which we will illustrate in a demo showing how to customize a human task flow. We also have the ability then to integrate with the business activity monitoring framework by utilizing a business activity component inside of the user interface. This is all made possible by the ADF data binding framework, which allows us to tie all of this stuff together visually and diagrammatically. So if we look at binding a JSF UI to SOA, we look at the Java EE way. We would have to write a manage bean, write the JSF page code, then write expression language, actually connect the JSF components of the manage bean, and then write more manage bean logic to actually then invoke the actions that would be necessary behind the scenes. Now if we look at the Oracle ADF way, it's pretty simple. We just utilize drag and drop, and the ADF binding handles the rest for us. So some of the ADF 11G built-in data controls that we have here, obviously the ADF business components, Java classes, EJBs, the placeholder data control, which is very effective at allowing us to prototype pages and then plug in the functionality later without losing a hold on the functionality that we wanted in there. And then the one that we're going to be looking at primarily in this demo, which is the web service data control. We also have the BAM data control as well, which was provided for us, and as we talked about in the last slide, for integrating BAM functionality. So for SOA and the ADF and SOA integration points, we go ahead and we have the possibility to expose ADF business components into the SCA using the Business Component Service Interface Wizard, which we will see in a demo. We are able to interact with the human workflow tasks in the ADF UI by either automatically creating ADF forms that represent the human task flow or customizing the workflow task details through JDeveloper, which we will also see. And then finally invoking a composite from the ADF UI, which we can do by utilizing the web service data control to utilize the WSDL that defines that composite to invoke through the data bindings and invoke that composite from a ADF UI activity. So the BAM data control, as we talked about before, for those of you that are not familiar, BAM is the business activity monitoring software that is provided as part of the Oracle Fusion stack. The BAM data control allows us to expose BAM data into a ADF application. We simply treat it as any other data control. We drag it to a JSF page, and it goes ahead and uses the data binding to go ahead and tie everything together. And allows us to push the client functionality utilizing the ADF Active Data Services, which was something that was extremely important that was provided to us as part of the BAM data control development. The Active Data Services allow us to circumvent one of the historical major problems, which was the latency of data, or how stale data was. In the past, we would have to requery to keep seeing the current data. In utilizing the push to client from Active Data Services, it does it for us. So exposing ADF business components to an SCA as an SDO object, we go ahead and we can expose any of our business component functionality as services. We can do it simply by clicking through a wizard, and in the end it goes ahead and creates a SOA adapter for us that can then be utilized in composite creation as an external reference And we'll go ahead and take a look at this now. In the demo, the first demo we have is exposing our business components as web services. So in this case, the SOA team has asked us to expose some of our business component functionality as a web service interface, SDO based in this case, for them to utilize for integration through into a composite application. So what we have here is a business components project that we're going to be utilizing, and if we click on the application module, we see the data objects that are inside of there. We go ahead and go to the service interface and decide to define one by clicking on the plus. By doing what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and provide a name for our service interface. And next we're going to have to go ahead and indicate what view objects we want to expose, and for each of the view objects we're able to define what SDO operations we want available for that particular view object through the service interface. And we do this for both of the view objects that we're going to be including. And we go ahead and click finish, and it will generate the interface for us. What it does now is, if we look at the view instance we've got in there, it will create for us the WSDL file that defines the service interface, as well as the XSDs that are necessary to define the business components that we are going to be exposing through that service interface. Now next what we're going to have to do is actually create deployment descriptors for the components that we're going to have in here. So we create new deployment descriptor, and in this one it's going to be our EGB model. We select the business component service interface, and once we create these deployment descriptors, we can go ahead and create a deployment profile for the application for us to deploy this to the SOA container. And so again, we're going to be deploying the components that we have defined within here. For the application, we actually create the deployment profile that we're going to be using, and we've got one already available for us, and we'll utilize that. Save all. And now we go down to the deploy operation, select the deployment profile that was for the application, and we're going to deploy it to the active application server. We select that we do not want to deploy to all containers. We're going to deploy specifically to the SOA container. And click finish, and JDeveloper will do the deployment for us. We can monitor this through the log window. If we look at deployment, we see it writing up the archives, aggregating them into an EAR file, and deploying it to the SOA container. Once this is completed, we'll actually be able to access through the console. We can see the deployments that are in the container that we just deployed to. And obviously, as one of those, we should see the application that we've been working with. So we go to Deployments and look for our EMP model SDO. There it is. Select that. And now we navigate through to the Testing tab, and it will give us the endpoints that are available for the SDO model and our default endpoint here. And what this will then do is it will allow us to invoke the actual service interface through an HTML format. And here we have all the operations exposed as we exposed them through, as we defined them for each of the views. And we're going to select Get Departments, and we select Department 60. And then we can go ahead and invoke this, and it will provide back for us an unformatted XML payload. We go ahead and select Formatted XML, and we can see the actual format. So now we're going to look at exposing human tasks in ADF. So given that we've got a task file that defines the human task, we can go ahead and utilize a task form wizard, or we can go ahead and create a data control based out of that, and go ahead and either create the whole page at a time or do it segmentally by creating each of the different pieces that we want so that we can customize it as we choose. In the demonstration, we will see the different methods illustrated of how we can go ahead and go about doing that. So now let's take a look at the demonstration for actually customizing the human task flow. So we're assuming now, again, dealing with our SOA team, that they've created a composite application and gone ahead and created a human task activity in there and provided us with a task definition file for that. The first demonstration that we're going to do is assuming that we actually have the entire composite project from JDeveloper, which we've got here. If we go ahead and open the actual Beeple flow and go to the human task activity that's inside of the composite, we see that we've got it there. We can explode it to actually see the activities that compose the actual activity itself, the human task activity. And once we have that, if we go to the actual commission human task inside of the diagrammer and select it and right click, it will give us the contextual options that we have available here. One of them is actually to launch the task form wizard, as we talked about before. It'll ask us to define a project to contain this inside of the composite application that we've got, because we're going to be defining the UI section to it. So we'll select the default project name, and it's going to start to step us through the wizard. And we see here that it allows us to name the form, do the header, the body, the different components that'll go within there, and customize it to a certain degree there. Alternatively, we can just select for it to auto-generate the task form for us. And what that will then do is, again, it's asking us for a project name, and it will go through and assume default values for all the stuff that we would have done inside of the wizard. And so if we look over here, it creates the actual data control that is going to be utilized for interacting with the payload, as well as the different sections of the page that we're going to be looking at. So we can go down and actually access the page itself to take a look at what was created. And so in here on the default page, again, remembering that we can customize this in any way that we choose, even though, because it's simply a default ADF JSF page, anything that we would like to do, we can do utilizing the data controls, altering the actual layout of the page, the flow to it, or what have you. All of the actual heavy lifting is done through the data control frame, or through the data binding framework. So here it goes ahead and creates some of the default activities for us. We have all the different sections that we would like to have, the history, the payload, and what have you. And then again, if we go over, we can look at the data controls which it used to actually compose that page. And if we go into the task, we see the different elements that it was using to go through the data binding. And in the actual payload itself, we can see the employee SDO that we created earlier and the different fields that we have there. So if we wanted to, we could go in and actually alter the layout, or the different placement, or even how the different components were defined on the page. So the other approach that I was talking about was actually creating a separate application, assuming that we were only provided the task definition itself from the SDO team, or the SOA team. And so now we need to create the application, add a couple of different technologies. It brings over the dependent ones for us. We'll take the defaults for the project names. And note, we have no data control here. That's because we haven't yet told the project that this is what we're doing. So if we go through the project, we can go ahead and tell it that we would like to create a human task page based on a human task itself. So we'll go down to JSF and actually say human task flow based on human task. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask us to navigate to the task definition file that was pulled out of the composite. If we navigate down to that and select it, now what it's going to do behind the scenes is it will create the data control for us, and it's going to ask us to actually create a task flow. And for those of you familiar with ADF, it should look fairly familiar. It's going to create a simple task flow for us, which we can expand on if we choose to, again, sticking with the customization. So we'll just take the defaults for the task flow names, and it creates this for us here. And we note that there's a red X inside of the default activity. It's because we haven't created the page yet. So we go ahead and double click on that, and it's going to open the editor for us to create our human task page. And we're going to do that utilizing the data control that it created for us based on the human task. So we drill into the data control, and we see we've got our task object there, and it's fully composed. It's got all the stuff that we saw before in the other approach. And we'll just take the whole task object and drag it over to a page. And here in the context menu, we've got human task options. We can go ahead and create it section-wise, as I described before, or in this case, we can just select complete task with payload. It's going to ask us to specify a couple of action bindings so it knows how to traverse through the binding layer. We'll take the defaults. And it's going to go ahead and create a page that looks just like the default page that we got from the auto generation from within the composite itself, the composite project itself, when we did that the other way. And again, we can go ahead and go through and customize this in any manner of ways that we choose. So now we've got the page. We can go ahead and we note that it creates the different sections that we had before, the different actions that we had as well. And then we're going to go ahead and deploy this one. We'll deploy the project to the application container that we had before. And again, because we defined it based on a task object that we got from the composite, it is aware of what composite we're actually creating the human task page for, and we'll bind it back to that. So if we go ahead and go to the BPM work list now, we can go ahead and log into that. We've already preceded this with a task that needs attention. And we go into it, and the task will be displayed. And when we select that task, we will see the human task page that we just created and deployed. It's got all the different sections, the detail section, the payload section. It's got our actions up in there. For example, if we wanted to escalate this or deny it. It also creates the default OK action for us next to it, which is the approval action for it to progress. And so in this case, we will go ahead and just select OK and allow it to proceed. And that should clear the task from our task page. So the next step that we're going to do is look at actually how we're going to integrate SOA artifacts back into our ADF UI. So we're going to use the web service data control. We provided a WSDL, and it gives us the data control, and we utilize the data control the same way that we use any other data control, by dragging and dropping it to a page and letting it use the binding layer to actually do invocations and executions against the WSDL defined web service. So let's go ahead and take a look at a demo of doing that, where we're going to actually create a composite UI and allow us to then invoke the composite that's running inside of the SOA container. So in this demo, we've got a project already. We've got the composite provided for us. We're going to say the web service data control. We give the data control a name. And we're going to provide the URL to the WSDL that we would like to interface with. Now we need to select the operations that we would like to invoke based on that WSDL. It goes ahead and creates the data control for us. We save everything. And next we will create an actual UI page that we will use this data control on. So we just create a simple JSF page. We use a standard layout for it. And when this is done, all we're going to need to do is, again, we can compose this page in any way that we would like. But in this case, we're just going to keep it simple. We'll go ahead and drag a layout component over from our component palette. And next we will go ahead and take the data control that was composed for us off of the WSDL definition that we used, going through the web service data control wizard, and we will drag it over to this page to actually create a form that we can use to then interact with the composite. So here we see inside of the data control, it provides us with several different things. We've dragged the employees over, and we're going to create an ADF form based out of it so that we can do input to the composite. Delete non-necessary fields as well as the generated fields. We'll include a submit button so that we can actually invoke the web service. And one last thing that we'll do just to see that it actually is executing properly is we can also look at the results from the actual invocation. So if we look at the return values and we drag over the employee ID, we can create it as an output text on this page as well. And that will allow us to actually see that we invoked the composite executed properly, created our employee, and gave us back the employee ID. We're also going to then need to go ahead and drag the action over to the submit button and select the process activity so that it will go ahead and actually create the employee, or so that it will invoke the composite with the create employee. Save all. And we can actually run this page in the integrated WebLogic container that's provided with JDeveloper. And when we see this, what it will do is it will show the page that we just created and allow us to enter a couple of different values. So we can see through the log window again that it's going to be deploying to the integrated container. And now the page is launched, we can go ahead and enter some employee data. And when we've got the data we want, we go ahead and click submit. It utilizes the bindings and goes ahead and invokes through the binding layer, invokes the composite, and the composite returns back to us the employee ID that we were looking for. So now we've got a created employee that went through the composite application. So in summary, the ADF binding is really the key to all of this. It allows us to continue to use the visual and declarative way of developing the UIs and customizing things however we would choose to. Our ADF integration with SOA is accomplished in a couple of different ways, which we demonstrated, by exposing our business components as services, by customizing human task flows, and by integrating composites back into our UIs utilizing the web service data controls. To learn more, feel free to go to the JDev homepage and check back for future ADF Insider sessions.